Jesus, Bible, and current events from a Christian perspective, battling spiritual wickedness in high places, one podcast at a time. This is the High Places Podcast. Hello everyone, this is Jim. First of all, election news. Can you believe this? The debates, the first Democratic debate is coming up in just 3 weeks, actually less than 3 weeks, June 26th and 27th. They have to have them like 2 nights consecutively because so far 20 candidates have qualified for the debate. And there's still 4 more days left for other candidates to qualify. So they have to split it between, they're having 10 candidates each night debating. And this is the first of 12 debates. Wow. People are going to get tired of listening to these folks. And then I guess the next debate is at the end of July, 30th and 31st, and then September 12th and 13th. So lots of things to hear about from all these candidates. And good old Uncle Joe is still leading the race, although it seems like he's kind of dropping in the polls because he isn't really getting out there and doing much. And then he had his flip-flop on abortion because with this whole Hyde Amendment about no federal funding for abortions. And that's been in place all this time, even though Planned Parenthood gets hundreds of millions of dollars every year from the federal government. So, yeah, it's a thing in name only. The money is still going to basically subsidize the operations of a child killer organization, and a eugenicist organization. But he's going back and forth because Joe's trying to be the, middle of the road guy so he can appeal to working class people. And, but middle of the road is not where the Democrats are now. And so, people have just been attacking him. So he had to flip flop on this thing. And now he's against the Hyde Amendment, because he was getting so much flack from the diehards in the Democrat Party, who are the ones that come out and vote in the primaries. So now he's had to waffle on that. So it's a bad sign for Joe, because he's going to try to be this middle of the road guy, and he's just going to get pulled to the left. And so the Democrats are bound and determined to nominate some basically out and out Marxist. So yeah, and I guess they're all in Iowa this week or something, because it's the start of Pride Month. Whenever I see that or hear that term as it relates to homosexuality, I always remember that verse from the Bible that says, "Pride goeth before destruction." And so it's interesting that we get to actually see that play out in full force at least once a year. And yeah, anyway. The Democrats are going as far to the left as they possibly can get. Not surprising from a party who took God out of their platform way back in 2012, and the delegates at the convention in 2012 booed when they tried to put God back in, because the powers that be in the Democrat Party realized that the rest of America wasn't going to be too thrilled with having God taken out of a party platform. But again, the delegates at the convention, these are the diehards. And so they actually booed the process of putting God back in the platform. And they didn't want it. It's just, yeah, okay. So more and more we just see God being shoved off to the side. There was something happened in the Netherlands with a Christian TV channel that was on there, and they got pulled off the air because someone complained about their positive coverage of Israel in one of their programs. It was a Palestinian viewer. I think it was a Palestinian living in the Netherlands. I think it was just like one or two people like complained about it, and that was enough to, get them yanked off the air. So, yeah, as the world more and more turns against God and His people, it doesn't take much at all to get God's people silenced. So the devil's on a roll, and more and more at every turn trying to get the gospel of Jesus Christ silenced. Yet God is still saving people around the world. So even when we have things going on in this country and major political parties and political people pushing very anti-God things on both sides of the political fence, it's good to know that God still cares enough about people to still save people, even in a culture like ours, where more and more people just don't want to have anything to do with them. It's interesting too, because I was thinking this week about just kind of the way the devil in our culture, people in our culture go after children. It's that time of year where people are graduating from high school and college, and I wind up going to a lot of graduations and events like that just because a lot of the young people at our church are graduating. And it's always interesting to me at these graduations because you always hear the young people talk, and they're always so hopeful and idealistic, and to a degree that's that's good. They may have been a bit shielded from reality, unfortunately. And so, but invariably, you see this very often, that a couple years down the road, you compare where these young people's lives are compared to that idealism of when they were leaving high school especially. And, they're going to take on the world, and, you hear all these, I mean, I've been going to graduations for decades, and you hear this same, thing, we're going to change the world, it's our time now, and da-da-da-da, and all this stuff. And, but for most young people, they in their generation don't change the world, they become a part of the world. And I think even more and more now, this, having grown up, these kids nowadays with this desire to be accepted by the world, by people at school, by strangers, through social media, and how traumatized people are when people defriend them or say bad things to them on like social media, people they don't even know in person, and it's devastating to them. And I was reading something about this whole idea of this kind of happiness environment, like the penultimate goal in life is to be happy. And you see this with all the false Christianity out there too, trying to sell the same thing. So we live in a culture that kind of promotes this, like there's this utopian happiness thing that's out there, and if this and this and this happens, then everybody will just have this idealistic life. First of all, that's contrary to what the Bible says, because as long as there's sinful people in the world, there's going to be all sorts of bad things happening in life. And the only time we're going to have, that perfect peace and that perfect bliss is when Jesus comes back and is running everything. And even then, there'll be people rebelling against him in the millennial kingdom. And so it isn't until all that's wiped out, when there's a new heavens and a new earth, that's when you'll have perfect peace reigning. But this again is a culture that's rejected God but still has a desire for heaven. They just don't want God's heaven, and they don't want God's way of getting to heaven. So they try to create heaven on earth. And that's the expectation. So this is where you get like the power of positive thinking thing. And it's even crept into Christianity with these, affirmational, this positive affirmation stuff, and power of positive thinking, Norman Vincent Peale, and all these sorts of, and he's just all this stuff today too. Because our culture is sort of striving for this perfect life. even though that's not what Jesus said we'll have. Christians will have hardship, they'll have persecution. But yet that's the goal, and when people don't run into that, it's devastating to them when reality hits. There was something like some 17-year-old, again, I think it was in the Netherlands. They have legalized euthanasia in the Netherlands. And this girl had something really tragic happen to her. I mean, I won't even talk about it, but it was truly tragic. But she was so devastated by it that she didn't want to go on living anymore, and she was allowed to legally kill herself. So it's not like, she slit her wrists or, jumped off a building. This was doctor-assisted suicide because she was sad. And she may have been justifiably sad, but the idea that kind of through an official channel and with the help of a doctor, one can kill themselves if life doesn't turn out the way they want, or if tragic things happen to people in life. There's such a low threshold now for people just thinking that life isn't worth living and this is some terrible thing. It's like, man, you know what? First of all, these are first world problems. Go to other parts of the world and, people can't get a clean glass of water. They're in fear of their lives all the time for any number of reasons. Starvation, and, bad people around. They live in a dangerous culture, all sorts of things. And it's been that way throughout most of human history. You're less likely to have bad things happen to you now than at almost any time in history, anywhere on the planet, if you live in like the developed world. But this expectation of this heaven on earth has so affected people that anything short of that just seems tragic. And then the devil's really got people fooled, because people will exit this life, and if they've died in their sins, they wind up in hell forever, and now they're in a place that's infinitely worse. And there's nothing they can do to get out of there. They can't even kill themselves to make that stop. So what a tragedy. But again, that's this expectation. And so it's just interesting to see these young people as they get older, like into their early 20s. And I've always said to people, and the pastor of our church says this too, there's periods of time in your youth that really affect the direction of the rest of your life. He says, from 15 to 25, you can really mess up your life. And I think particularly like 18 to 22, 23, all you have to do is make a couple of really bad decisions, or even decisions that don't seem so bad at the time, but they send your life off into such a different trajectory that you're never able to actually get back. And all you can do once you're down that path is try to make that path as good as it can be. But for a lot of people, there's no way back out of that, just because life happens. This is particularly true with young people who grow up in church. And I think the adults in their lives underestimate the power and influence that the devil and his children in this world have on them. Because you see all these kids, once they turn 18, or once they move out of their parents' house, they don't show up to church anymore. They're not reading their Bibles. They may renounce their, so-called faith. And people, the grown-ups will say, well, I think they're backsliding, or, something's happened and they're just not as strong in their faith. And it's like, well, maybe they never had faith. Just because their parents made them go to church, or they got praised for memorizing Bible verses in Sunday school, it doesn't mean they're saved. It just means they did things to make the grown-ups happy. You can test this. Tell your kids that from now on they can decide if they want to go to church with you on Sunday morning, and see what happens. Most parents won't do that, though, because I think they're kind of afraid of what their kids might decide. Is there a hunger for God and His people and His Word and praising Him? I don't know. But I think because with kids that grow up in church, the grown-ups think that, they have this faith. And so when they're assaulted by these things of the enemy, in school in particular, and with their friends, or with the media they consume, I think they assume too much about these kids being able to discern what's right and what's wrong, because they attribute to them a faith that may not be there, just because the kids know how to act Christianly around other Christians. And so, I know some young people that have been involved in our church that once they turned 18, you don't see them on Sunday morning. There's some of them I haven't seen in years. And so, okay, what's going on there? Are they doing anything Christian? How would someone know they're a Christian if they just spent time with them? How would they even know? So when you have schools, for example, constantly pounding things into these kids' head about the God of the Bible, and whether it's, God doesn't exist because evolution is God, and they're, kids are, they have that pounded in their head year after year after year, or that God is hateful because he doesn't approve of people's sin, or because God says there's only one way to him, and that's through Jesus. Jesus said, "No man comes to the Father but by me." So that doesn't leave a lot of room for Muhammad or Buddha. Or whether young people are just taught that sin isn't very serious. Look at all we mentioned last time, the sex ed that's going on in California, which, and of course a lot of these programs are run by Planned Parenthood. So a company that makes money from pregnancy is getting to sexualize children in classrooms, in school, and being paid with taxpayer money. So you think Planned Parenthood has a vested interest in getting those kids sexualized so that they will engage in these activities and the girls will become pregnant? Because the younger a child is, the less likely she's going to be able to raise another child. And so there's Planned Parenthood offering, that abortion cookie right out in front of them and just dangling that for them as an option. And so a company that makes money from pregnancy is teaching kids about sex. And we could go on and on again with, the things that are consumed in the media and the kinds of people and the behaviors that are glorified, and even in the household. How are parents behaving? Parents can take their kids to church, but if the parents aren't living the way God says a saved person should live, then all that does is teach the kids that as long as you say the right things, you can act any way you want to. You can be a hypocrite, and people will still tell you you're saved. So you don't have to worry about hell or anything else. Just keep living the way you want to, as long as you know how to say the right things at the right time in the right places to the right people. Unfortunately, the biggest enemy of children's souls tend to be the adults in their lives, and the adults that are put in position of authority. Teachers, sadly parents. And so this is why people worry about sheltering their kids. Yeah, don't worry about sheltering your kids from evil stuff. You should stay away from that. The Bible says abstain from every form of evil. And so if that means keeping your kids away from these evil things in the world, so be it. That's why I'm such an advocate of not putting children in public schools. because that's the devil's factory. Everything about that environment is set up to undermine a child's soul. The education, the peer pressure, the kinds of people that they encounter, the values that are instilled, 7-8 hours a day, 5 days a week. The teachers and the school spends more time with the kids than the parents do. More waking time. So that's why I think churches, I think it's great that churches give money to missionaries and have all these other programs. But first and foremost, in my opinion, churches should be setting money aside to educate the children in their church in a Christian school or through homeschooling or homeschool co-ops, something to get them out of that environment because your kids might not be saved. And if they are in those environments getting these values instilled in them 5 days a week for 12 years, don't think that doesn't have an impact. And don't be shocked when your kids turn 18 or move out of your house and all of a sudden you never see them in church anymore. They're not reading their Bibles, and they're not behaving like a Christian is supposed to behave, and they're doing all sorts of things, and their life has gone off in a tragic direction. Don't be surprised, because the devil sows seeds as well. And if he's sowing these seeds through your child's entire childhood, don't think that isn't going to have an impact. So it's just amazing. There's so many things, and things that we talked about Disney last time, and like the ABC quote unquote family channel, and so all this stuff is masquerading as something that's kid friendly, and it's not. The devil's just out to get young people. And so, but this shouldn't be much of a surprise, because even Jesus talked about this. Jesus said, this in Matthew 18, verse 6. And I think he was probably talking about Christians in general, but the terminology he uses, I think, really puts an interesting focus on young people, because he was talking about children. If you start in verse 4, he said, whoever therefore humbles himself as this little child, the same is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Whoever receives one such little child in my name receives me. And then verse 6, but whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to stumble, it would be better for him that a huge millstone should be hung around his neck, and that he should be sunk in the depths of the sea. It would be better for that to happen to someone, rather than what is going to happen to them if they lead these little ones who believe in him to stumble. And so even if your kid is saved, if they're getting all this stuff pushed into their head about the world's values rather than God's values, and we're going to start to see, like I said, June is Pride Month. So you're going to get a lot of messages about what's acceptable and what's good. Not just on that issue, but there's stuff every day. Don't let your kids watch television. They'll get a whole bunch of messages on what's good and what isn't. And they almost always conflict with what God said is what's good and what isn't. So, train up your child in the way he should go. And when he's old, he will not depart from it. So train the child up. Don't let the world train up your children, because that's what the world's doing, because the devil is out to destroy souls. Make sure that you're not giving the devil fertile soil in which to sow his evil seeds. That's going to do it for this time. Take care, everybody. God bless you.